Back in the golden age of American kitchens, long before frozen dinners and drive-through meals took over, families gathered around heavy wooden tables waiting for supper to come out of the oven. The smell of butter, beef gravy, baked casseroles, and creamy sauces filled homes, while mothers carefully followed recipes from faded Betty Crocker cookbooks. Some of these meals once appeared at church gatherings, holiday dinners, and quiet Sunday evenings across America. But today, most younger generations have never even heard of them. And some of these forgotten suppers are stranger than anything you can imagine. In fact, number 7 is a dish most people today would never recognize, and number 10 was once considered one of the fanciest homemade dinners in America. So tonight, we're stepping back into a lost world of vintage American comfort food and uncovering 10 old Betty Crocker suppers nobody cooks anymore. Part 01: Chicken and Rice Skillet. In the years after World War II, few meals appeared on American dinner tables more often than chicken and rice skillet. During the 1950s and early 1960s, this simple supper became a symbol of comfort for working families trying to stretch every dollar without sacrificing warmth or flavor. Mothers loved it because everything cooked together in one heavy pan, while children waited at the table listening to the sound of rice simmering beside juicy chicken pieces. Old Betty Crocker cookbooks described it as the perfect, busy evening supper. Back then, many homes still didn't rely on frozen meals or fast food. Dinner was expected to be homemade, filling, and shared together at the same time every evening. Chicken and rice skillet fit perfectly into that world. The dish usually began with chicken thighs browned in butter until the skin turned golden and crispy. Then onions, celery, broth, and uncooked rice were added directly into the skillet. As everything slowly cooked together, the rice absorbed every bit of flavor from the chicken and seasonings. Some families added peas or carrots, while others poured cream soup into the pan to make it richer and thicker. By today's standards, it looked plain. There were no exotic ingredients, fancy plating, or colorful sauces. But for millions of Americans, this supper meant stability. It meant the family had made it through another long day. As television dinners became popular in the late 1960s and fast food chains spread across the country, slow skillet suppers like this slowly disappeared from American kitchens. But older generations still remember the smell of chicken and rice drifting through the house just before sunset. Part 02: Beef Stew Casserole. During the cold winters of the 1950s and 1960s, few meals brought more comfort to American families than beef stew casserole. Long before microwave dinners filled supermarket freezers, this heavy, slow-baked supper warmed kitchens across the country with the rich smell of beef, onions, potatoes, and thick brown gravy bubbling inside large casserole dishes. Old Betty Crocker recipes promoted meals like this as practical, affordable, and perfect for feeding large families during difficult financial times. Many parents who lived through the Great Depression still believed food should be filling, economical, and never wasted. Tough cuts of beef were slowly cooked for hours until they became soft enough to fall apart with a fork. The casserole often started with chunks of beef browned in bacon fat or butter before being layered with carrots, peas, onions, and sliced potatoes. Everything was covered in rich beef gravy, then baked slowly in the oven while the entire house filled with a deep savory aroma. Some families topped it with biscuits or buttery breadcrumbs for extra texture. What made beef stew casserole special was not elegance. It was survival mixed with comfort. After long factory shifts, freezing winters, or stressful financial years, families gathered around these meals because they were dependable. The casserole dish itself usually sat directly in the middle of the dinner table while everyone served themselves together. Today, many younger Americans have never tasted a true homemade beef stew casserole. Fast food replaced slow oven suppers, and modern meals became quicker but less personal. Yet for older generations, this forgotten dish still represents something larger than food. A time when dinner brought the entire household into the same room every single night. Part 03: Shepherd's Pie Deluxe. Long before trendy comfort food restaurants began reinventing old recipes, American families already had their own rich version of shepherd's pie, sitting on dinner tables across the 1950s and 1960s. Known in many vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks as Shepherd's Pie Deluxe, this hearty casserole transformed simple leftovers into a supper that felt surprisingly luxurious during difficult times. The original idea came from older British and Irish meat pies, but American home cooks changed the recipe to fit post-war kitchens and supermarket ingredients. Instead of lamb, most families used ground beef because it was cheaper, easier to find, and stretched further for large households. The word deluxe usually meant extra cheese, buttery mashed potatoes, or creamy gravy layered inside the dish. For many children growing up during that era, the sight of shepherd's pie deluxe coming out of the oven meant dinner was finally ready. Beneath the golden mashed potato topping sat layers of seasoned beef, onions, peas, carrots, and thick brown gravy slowly bubbling underneath. Some mothers piped the mashed potatoes into decorative swirls to make the casserole feel elegant enough for guests or Sunday dinners. What made this meal so popular was its practicality. Families hated wasting food, especially parents who remembered wartime rationing and Depression-era hardship. Leftover mashed potatoes and small amounts of meat could easily become a completely new supper the next evening. But as convenience foods exploded during the 1970s, meals requiring oven time and preparation slowly faded away. Frozen pizzas, box dinners, and drive-through restaurants replaced dishes like shepherd's pie deluxe. Today, many younger Americans recognize the name, but few have experienced the old homemade version that once filled kitchens with warmth on cold evenings across suburban America. Part 04. Chicken Divine Casserole. In the 1960s and 1970s, there was one casserole that appeared at church dinners, neighborhood potlucks, and suburban family gatherings so often that many Americans could recognize its smell before even seeing it. It was called Chicken Divine Casserole, and despite its elegant name, it was built from simple ingredients found in nearly every middle-class kitchen of the era. Vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks presented dishes like this as modern, sophisticated, and perfect for entertaining guests without spending too much money. During those decades, American families became fascinated with creamy casseroles inspired by French cooking, but simplified for busy homemakers using canned soup, frozen vegetables, and shredded cheese. Chicken Divine usually began with broccoli layered beneath chunks of cooked chicken inside a deep casserole dish. Then came the famous sauce, a creamy mixture often made with mayonnaise, cream soup, lemon juice, curry powder, and cheddar cheese. Once baked, the top turned golden and slightly crispy while the inside stayed rich, creamy, and heavy. For many families, this dish felt fancy enough for special occasions. Mothers proudly served it during holidays, card parties, or Sunday evening dinners when relatives visited. Some even topped it with crushed crackers or buttered breadcrumbs for extra crunch. Today, the combination may sound unusual to younger generations, especially the mix of curry powder and canned soup. But during that era, recipes like this represented something important. America was becoming more experimental with flavors while still holding onto the convenience cooking culture that exploded after World War II. As healthier eating trends and fast food culture grew stronger in later decades, rich casseroles like Chicken Divine slowly disappeared from dinner tables. Yet older Americans still remember those bubbling dishes coming out of the oven, filling entire homes with warmth before sunset. Part 05. Tuna Surprise Ring. Among all the strange and unforgettable suppers created during America's casserole era, few dishes confused modern viewers more than the famous tuna surprise ring. During the 1950s and 1960s, however, this unusual meal was considered creative, impressive, and surprisingly elegant for middle-class dinner parties. Vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks encouraged homemakers to turn inexpensive pantry ingredients into meals that looked sophisticated enough for guests. Tuna became extremely popular after World War II because canned seafood was affordable, lasted for months on pantry shelves, and could feed entire families during difficult financial periods. The ring itself was usually made from baked biscuit dough, mashed potatoes, or rice molded into a large circular shape on a baking tray. In the center sat the creamy tuna filling, a thick mixture of canned tuna, peas, celery, onions, mayonnaise, cream sauce, and sometimes chopped olives or water chestnuts for texture. Once baked, the entire dish looked like something straight from a retro magazine advertisement. To modern audiences, the recipe may sound bizarre, but during that era, presentation mattered almost as much as flavor. Housewives proudly carried dishes like tuna surprise ring to potlucks and bridge parties because they looked modern and sophisticated compared to ordinary casseroles. The word surprise, often referred to unusual ingredients hidden inside the filling. Some versions included boiled eggs, pimentos, or crunchy vegetables families would never expect in a seafood supper. As American tastes changed in the 1970s and 1980s, canned tuna casseroles slowly lost popularity. Younger generations began preferring pizza, burgers, and fast food instead of molded seafood dishes covered in creamy sauce. Today, tuna surprise ring survives mostly in faded cookbook pages and family recipe boxes. A strange reminder of a time when America proudly transformed pantry staples into centerpiece dinners. Part 06. Beef Burgundy Elegante. In the decades after World War II, many American families became fascinated with continental cooking, rich European-inspired meals that sounded luxurious, sophisticated, and worldly. One of the most ambitious dishes to emerge from that era was beef Burgundy Elegante, a dramatic supper that promised ordinary suburban households a taste of French-style fine dining without ever leaving home. Vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks often used words like elegante to make recipes feel upscale and impressive. During the 1960s, serving a dish with a French-sounding name made dinner parties feel refined, especially as Americans became increasingly interested in international cuisine after years of wartime rationing and simple Depression-era meals. The dish itself was rich, heavy, and slow-cooked for hours. Large chunks of beef simmered in deep brown gravy alongside mushrooms, onions, carrots, and cooking wine until the meat became tender enough to cut with a spoon. Some versions included bacon or buttered noodles served underneath the stew to absorb the thick sauce. For many families, beef Burgundy Elegante was reserved for special occasions. It appeared during holiday gatherings, anniversary dinners, or evenings when important guests visited the house. Mothers often spent an entire afternoon preparing it while the smell slowly filled every room in the home. To younger generations today, the meal may simply resemble ordinary beef stew. But during the mid-century American supper era, this dish symbolized status. It represented a time when families believed cooking something slow, rich, and complicated showed care, patience, and sophistication. As convenience meals and frozen dinners became more common in the 1970s, recipes requiring hours of preparation slowly disappeared from American kitchens. Yet older cookbook collections still preserve dishes like beef Burgundy Elegante, reminders of an era when dinner itself was treated like a formal event rather than a rushed necessity. Part 07. Lobster Newburgh Supreme. By the 1960s, some American families were no longer satisfied with simple casseroles and skillet suppers. As post-war prosperity spread across suburban neighborhoods, many households began experimenting with extravagant recipes that once belonged only to luxury restaurants. One of the most surprising examples was Lobster Newburgh Supreme, a rich seafood dish so expensive and elegant that many younger Americans today have never even heard of it. Vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks presented recipes like this as the ultimate symbol of sophisticated entertaining. Serving lobster at home during that era instantly made a dinner party feel upscale. It suggested wealth, refinement, and modern culinary ambition. The dish itself was incredibly rich. Tender lobster meat was folded into a creamy sauce made with butter, egg yolks, cream, and cooking sherry. Some versions included paprika or cayenne pepper for warmth, while others were served over toast points, puff pastry shells, or buttered rice. The word supreme usually meant even more cream, extra lobster, or decorative presentation designed to impress guests. For middle-class Americans during the 1950s and 1960s, recipes like this represented aspiration. Families wanted meals that looked glamorous enough to belong in fancy hotel dining rooms or luxury cruise ships. Women proudly served dishes like lobster Newburgh during anniversaries, holiday gatherings, or formal dinner parties lit by candles and surrounded by polished silverware. But over time, tastes changed. Rich cream sauces became unfashionable, lobster prices increased dramatically, and simpler foods replaced elaborate seafood suppers. Today, most Americans associate lobster with restaurants rather than homemade family dinners. Yet old cookbooks still preserve Lobster Newburgh Supreme as a fascinating reminder of an era when ordinary families dreamed of bringing fine dining directly into their own kitchens, even if only for one special evening. Part 08. Veal Paprikash. During the 1950s and 1960s, American dinner tables began changing in ways many families had never experienced before. After decades of simple meat and potato meals, home cooks became fascinated with international recipes that sounded exotic and sophisticated. One forgotten dish that briefly became popular in suburban kitchens was veal paprikash, a rich Hungarian-inspired supper filled with deep paprika flavor and heavy creamy sauce. Vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks helped introduce meals like this to American households by simplifying old European recipes into something busy homemakers could recreate at home. During that era, even using foreign-sounding names made dinner feel exciting and modern. Traditional paprikash originated in Hungary, where cooks slowly simmered meat with onions and large amounts of paprika to create a warm, smoky stew. American versions often used tender veal cooked in butter alongside onions, broth, sour cream, and paprika until the sauce became thick, smooth, and deeply red in color. Many families served it over egg noodles or buttered dumplings to make the meal more filling. For Americans during the post-war decades, dishes like veal paprikash represented cultural curiosity. Families wanted to explore the flavors of Europe without leaving their kitchens. Hosting a dinner with a recipe that sounded foreign made many households feel sophisticated and worldly. But over time, the dish slowly faded from popularity. Veal became more expensive, fewer people cooked slow cream-based meals at home, and younger generations gravitated toward quicker foods and familiar fast food chains instead. Today, many Americans have never tasted homemade veal paprikash, and some have never even heard the name before. Yet hidden inside old cookbook collections, the recipe survives as a reminder of a strange moment in American history, when suburban kitchens briefly transformed into tiny windows to the wider world. Part 09. Duck à l'orange casserole. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, American home cooking reached a strange crossroads. On one side were simple skillet meals and casseroles, and on the other were ambitious, fancy dinners inspired by European cuisine. Somewhere in between, dishes like duck à l'orange casserole appeared, a forgotten experiment that tried to bring restaurant-style elegance into suburban kitchens. Old Betty Crocker cookbooks often encouraged home cooks to impress guests with meals that sounded luxurious, even if the ingredients were adapted for everyday households. Duck, once considered a special occasion meat, was paired with a sweet citrus glaze that gave the dish a bold, unexpected flavor profile. In its classic form, duck was slowly roasted until the skin turned crisp and golden. Then came the signature orange sauce, a thick blend of orange juice, sugar, vinegar, and sometimes butter, simmered until it became glossy and slightly tangy. In casserole-style versions, the meat was baked together with the sauce, allowing the flavors to soak deep into every layer. For families hosting dinner parties, this dish was more than just food. It was presentation, ambition, and pride on a plate. Serving duck à l'orange casserole meant the household was keeping up with modern culinary trends, even if the recipe was simplified for home ovens and budget ingredients. But as time passed, the dish quietly disappeared. Duck became less common in everyday American cooking, and the rise of fast food and quicker meals pushed elaborate casseroles out of weekly routines. The effort it required no longer matched the pace of modern life. Today, duck à l'orange casserole feels almost mythical, a reminder of a time when even ordinary families tried to recreate fine dining at home, one ambitious recipe at a time. Part 10. Beef Wellington Individual. In the final stretch of America's mid-century dinner culture, there was one dish that stood above all others in ambition, elegance, and complexity: individual beef Wellington. It was the kind of supper that never belonged to everyday life, yet somehow found its way into suburban kitchens through glossy magazine pages and trusted Betty Crocker cookbooks. This dish represented the peak of special occasion cooking in the 1960s and early 1970s. Families prepared it when something truly important was being celebrated: anniversaries, milestone birthdays, or rare formal dinners at home. The idea itself felt almost theatrical. A perfectly seasoned beef fillet wrapped in layers of mushroom duxelle, then encased in buttery pastry and baked until golden. The individual version made it even more personal. Instead of one large roast, each guest received their own perfectly wrapped portion, carefully plated as if it came from a high-end restaurant. For many households, this was not just dinner. It was a performance of hospitality, effort, and pride. The process was slow and demanding. The beef had to be seared, cooled, wrapped, and baked with precision. One small mistake could ruin the delicate balance between crisp pastry and tender meat. But that challenge was part of its prestige. As decades passed, dishes like this began to disappear from home kitchens. Convenience foods, changing lifestyles, and faster dining habits replaced recipes that required hours of attention and care. What once felt like the height of culinary achievement slowly became something people only saw in restaurants. Today, individual beef Wellington survives mostly in old recipe collections and memory, the final reminder of an era when American families believed that even a single dinner could feel like a celebration worth remembering. And just like that, we step out of a kitchen that once defined an entire era of American life. From simple skillet suppers to extravagant dinner table masterpieces, these forgotten meals tell a story far bigger than food itself. They reflect a time when evenings were slower, recipes were handwritten, and every dinner felt like it mattered. But today, most of these dishes have faded into cookbooks, magazine pages, and quiet family memories. Only a few still recognize the smell, the texture, or even the names we just explored. If this journey brought back memories or revealed something you've never heard before, make sure to subscribe to America's Lost Recipes. Because next time, we're uncovering another lost chapter of American history, one forgotten meal at a time.